so joining us now is somebody who has predicted the last 10 elections and the results of the last 10 elections in the United States, going back all the way to the 1980s, Professor Allan Lichtman. Thank you very much. He's a professor of history who's now joining us. Professor, thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18. First of all, I want to add this caveat. Of course, your final prediction for the 2024 cycle is not out yet. You are saying that your final prediction will be made after the Democratic National Convention sometime in the middle of August. But as of now, your preliminary prediction, which you made in the last week of June, even before Joe Biden withdrew from the race, is that Kamala Harris is projected to be the winner of the presidential race. Can you give our viewers a little more details as to how you've come to this conclusion, this prediction, and the reasoning for this prediction? Why do you think it will be Kamala Harris who will be able to cross the line as opposed to Donald Trump?
By dropping out, Biden cost the Democrats one key, the incumbency key that I mentioned. But Democrats who were shamefully trashing their incumbent president right out in public have gotten smart and united around Harris. She really has no opposition, so they've preserved the contest key. So right now, the Democrats are down three keys with Harris as the nominee. The mandate key, because they lost U.S. House seats in the midterms, obviously the incumbency key, and the incumbent charisma key, because Harris is not an FDR. So that means three more keys would have to fall to predict their defeat. And I only have four shaky keys that are undecided, and three of them would have to fall. That's possible, but not likely. The keys are third party. RFK Jr. would have to stabilize at 10% or more. That seems very unlikely. He's actually going down rather than up, which may be an offshoot of the Harris candidacy, because voters don't have to now choose between two very aged candidates. Social unrest. We've had some sporadic social unrest, but to turn the key, there has to be massive social unrest, like in the 1960s, that threatens the stability of the country. Haven't seen anything like that, and kind of not having Biden, the sitting president, front and center in the campaign may also work to the benefit of avoiding social unrest. And the two shakiest keys, given what's going on in Gaza and Ukraine, are foreign/military failure and foreign/military success. So I have said, as you note, a final prediction will come after the Democratic convention, but right now a lot would have to go wrong for Harris to lose. Could happen, but a lot would have to go wrong.
I do want to ask you, because you are among the few poll pundits, as it were, to give Kamala Harris an upper hand over Donald Trump. We have looked at 10 different polls, from the CNN poll to Reuters to Ipsos to the New York Times. 8 out of those 10 polls predict that Trump has the edge, anywhere between 1% to 3% nationally, and more importantly, Trump is leading in all of the 6 battleground states against Kamala Harris. Trump has 48%, while Harris has 46%. What explains this sharp divide, this polarization, the fact that 8 out of 10 polls are predicting a Trump victory, but you are predicting a Harris victory?
You can take early polls and do with them what the great philosopher David Hume said you should do to works of superstition: consign them to the flames. They have zero predictive value, and in this case, you can't go below zero. But the polls are even more incredibly unreliable because Harris has only been the candidate for a week or so. It hasn't really sunk in yet to the American people. So completely throw the polls away. And the most recent polls that I saw that came out today and yesterday show a very different picture. Harris actually ahead in the national vote, and even or ahead or slightly behind in the swing states. But leave that aside. As I said, no predictive value. Plus, the error in these polls are much greater than the pollsters tell you, and they're not random. You've heard, of course, the error margin, right, is plus and minus about 3%. That's pure statistical error. That's the error you would get if you had a big jar of green and red balls, and you pulled a sample to estimate the percentage of green and red balls in the jar. But human beings are not green and red balls. Most people don't respond to pollsters. They may lie. They may not have focused on the election and may change their mind. Plus, no one's voted yet. So the pollsters have to guess who the likely voters are. That creates a very large margin of error above and beyond the plus and minus 3. That's not random. In 2016, the pollsters underestimated Republican voting strength. So, like generals fighting the last war, they overcorrected and they're now underestimating Democratic voting strength. In the 2022 midterms, the off year, and the special elections, Democrats, when there's actual voting, have been outperforming the polls by 5 percentage points or more. The most indicative election was the most famous, the special election in Congress in New York for the seat previously held by the disgraced George Santos. A poll taken just a couple of days before the election had it as a dead heat. Democrat +1. The Democrat won by 8 points, outpolling the polls by 7.
Okay, so let me ask you, obviously Joe Biden had a very dismal performance in the CNN debate against Donald Trump, yet you feel that Biden stepping back in favor of Harris is actually working for the Democrats. If yes, what are the reasons? And more importantly, the assassination attempt. We've had two big events that have happened in the last month and within the space of a week. You had the assassination attempt on Donald Trump on the 13th of July, and within the space of a week, Biden withdrew and endorsed Harris to be the Democratic candidate. What are the implications of both of these news events on the candidacy, on the respective candidates, whether it's Donald Trump for the Republicans or Kamala Harris for the Democrats? Or do you believe that the news cycle and news events, as big as they may be, as cataclysmic as they may be, do not have an impact on the race itself and who the eventual winner is?
I already explained the impact of the Harris candidacy. We went over that in detail. The Trump assassination attempt, the convention, zero effect on my keys. The keys are the North Star of prediction. They remain unchanged despite the ebb and flow of campaign events. Every 4 years, someone comes to me and says, you got to change your keys because we have something so different this year. We have an African American running. Never had that. The nation will never elect an African American. We have a woman running. We have social media. We have a presidential candidate on tape bragging about sexually assaulting women. Surely you have to change your prediction of a Trump win. And of course I don't, because the keys are incredibly robust. Retrospectively, they go all the way back in development to 1860, when we had no women voting. Most African Americans were enslaved. We were an African American economy, no automobiles, no airplanes, no radio, no television. So the keys have endured vastly greater changes than we see in individual elections. Plus, you try to change your model on the fly, that's a sure recipe for error.
Okay, so let me ask you a final question. What do you feel is the major difference between a Biden Democratic ticket and a Harris Democratic ticket, particularly when it comes to enthusing the base, the Democratic base, as you said? What is it about Kamala Harris that is appealing to the Democratic base, to the voters? Is it women because she's made abortion a central point of her campaign? Is it people of color? Because, of course, it would be history in the making if she were to be elected as the first woman and woman of color to be elected president of the United States. And then, of course, you go back to the 2016 cycle, and people said the United States of America is not ready to have a woman as the president of the country. What has changed from 2016 to now?
There's an old Zen saying, unask the question. That's the wrong question to be asking me. You cannot predict elections by trying to parse out who candidates appeal to, who candidates don't appeal to, what might happen in this state or that state. That is an impossible way to predict elections. That's why I have the keys, which are integral parameters that transcend all of those individual events, attempts to, predict bottom up. Give the example of your cup of tea. You pour sugar in your tea. You can't learn anything by trying to follow the individual sugar molecules. But through some simple integral parameters, you can learn a lot, like sweetness and density. That's the beauty of the keys. They deal with the simple integral parameters of incumbent performance and strength that transcends all of these really inaccurate measures to try to predict elections. That's one of the reasons why so many of the analysts, almost all of them, were wrong about 2016. They were wrong about 2012, when after Obama's disastrous first performance in the debate, the polls turned against him. They were wrong about 1988, when George Bush fell 17 points behind Dukakis in June of the election year.
Okay. Professor Allan Lichtman, thank you very much for joining us. We will be in touch with you. We will be very keenly watching whether your 13 keys are able to predict this year's winner as well. Of course, for now, you are predicting that Kamala Harris has the edge. Your final prediction will be after the Democratic National Convention, which is in the third week of August. That was Professor Allan Lichtman, the man who's got the last 10 elections, prediction of the last 10 elections in the United States, all the way back to the 1980 election cycle, when he predicted that Ronald Reagan would win. That's a wrap of Brass Tacks, coming to you live from the CNN News 18 and Brass Tacks Federal Bank Primetime Studio. From me, Zaka Jacob, and the rest of the team, we'll catch you again tomorrow night, same time. Thank you very much. Good night.